The welding theory being taught in East African schools was generally good, but the major gap we found was in the skills development area. There are understandable reasons for this, as I will explain. I have personally visited and inspected these welding schools across East Africa over the last 3 years, often with the assistance of representatives of the American Welding Society and other welding training experts on our GFP International advisory team and consultants. Now let's look at some facts we found when inspecting a cross-section of East African welding schools in Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. We found that 85% of a student's time in East Africa was spent on learning welding theory and technology and only 15% of time on skills practice. In contrast, current programs, which lead to welder certification skills, spend 85% of the time on skill practice and only 15% of time on theory. In general, welding schools in East Africa had one or two welding machines for each 10 students. In schools that produce certifiable welders, there is a welding booth for each student, and each booth typically has one or two welding machines, including different processes. This means that a certified welding school requires 5 to 10 times the number of welding machines to produce the same number of graduates, but with certification. This will normally require larger and better equipped training facilities. We found in our study that the 23 welding schools we visited had between one or two welding machines per 10 students, as noted earlier, while modern welding schools have 1 to 2 welding machines per student, as shown on the right. Modern welding schools also have fully equipped fabrication shops where welders learned how to apply their skills in the industrial welding workplace, in particular fabrication skills. On average, the East African schools we visited only had about 25% of the fabrication equipment that fully equipped industrial welding schools have. The welding school at the left lacks welding booths, adequate lighting, proper ventilation, and sufficient shop equipment, and not enough welding machines to train industrial welders effectively. The school on the right is a school which produces certified welders in the U.S., with welding booths, ventilation, good lighting, and all the equipment needed. These basic welding training positions are identified by numbers and letters. The number represents the position, and the letter identifies the weld type. There are many variations to the basic welding curriculum, which are often designed to meet specific needs in the industries served by the school. The following slide lists the number of hours welding practice is required to pass certification skill tests for shield and metal arc welding, also referred to as stick welding. Stick welding is typically the welding introduction course. Later, other types of welding is trained, such as TIG and MIG welding. Let's take a closer look at the problem that exists across sub-Saharan Africa welding schools. As you can see in this tabulation, the total number of actual welding skill practice hours is 404 hours for a 12-week course at a quality South African welding school that prepares students to pass internationally recognized certification tests. This means that the student spends 84% of his or her time during that 12 weeks in actual welding, and very little time on welding theory. In contrast, this is a summary of the skill practice hours provided at a government-run welding school in East Africa. It includes a total of only 150 hours of skill practice training in stick welding over one entire year of school, and a total of 246 hours of skill practice hours over a full 3 years welding training program. This 3-year program only provides students with 246 total hours of skill practice versus 404 hours for a 12-week stick welding course that actually prepares students for certification. Sadly, this program prepares students to work on burglar bars, steel furniture, doors and windows, and other such ornamental welding crafts, but it does not prepare the students to enter the international structural and industrial workforce. This diagram helps illustrate the stark difference in training approaches. In the structural welding training course shown at the top of the slide, the student gets a 404 hours of stick welding practice in a 12-week course, shown in the blue in the structural program at the top left of the slide. The student is prepared to take skill tests and earn IIW or AWS certificates for the positions it was trained to. The 3-year ornamental welding course shown at the bottom of the slide exposes the student to 3 welding processes, but only gives the student 246 hours of skill practice over an entire 3-year program. These students are not prepared to pass any internationally recognized skill tests and certifications. As a construction executive, these are the kinds of skill certificates that I require from a welder before being allowed to work on any of my sites, and this is a standard practice across the industrial world based on my experience and observation. Certificates that meet the requirements of the American Welding Society or International Institute of Welding are the most common certificates that I've seen through my career. Without a doubt, the government welding school curriculum that I showed above does not prepare students to obtain these certificates. However, I have talked with many African welders who mistakenly believe that if only they could have access to a testing center, they would be able to obtain these certificates and get good jobs. Sadly, this is flat wrong. Rigidity in the government education ministries curricula must change, and they must allow the flexibility in the welding curricula applied at their schools. Unless and until this change occurs, governments are not only failing their students, but they are failing their industrial development efforts and industries who need welders with the certified skills that will meet global industry quality standards. As mentioned, we have anecdotal reports from the East African crude oil pipeline project that only about 2% of welders who applied for the project could meet the skills standards. We also note in recent reports in the Kenyan media that a major Mideast employer found that fewer than 5% of the Kenyans applying for skilled jobs met the requirements. Here is a certificate that merely states that the student completed a 480-hour stick welding course. This, too, does not appear to meet global industrial standards. It doesn't indicate how many hours of practice it was indicated, and it merely states that the student attended a 480-hour course. Student testing and certification by a recognized body such as the AWS, IIW, or Canadian Welding Bureau is what industries require. There are exceptions to this rule, such as local cottage industries in the African market, but if a student wants something equivalent to a global passport, recognized certification is the best way forward. I have shortened this discussion about certifications for the sake of simplicity, but there are other standards which govern welding work, such as the ISO 3834.2 standard and Section 9 of the ASME code, depending on the governing project specifications. My point is that training which focuses on skill development prepares the student for the world of work much better than the ornamental training described above. Industrial welding skills are a fundamental building block for a modern economy. It is one of the skills that cannot be learned as an apprentice. It requires months of dedicated practice while wearing a hood, peering through smoke glass, and working under the helpful eye of a trained instructor. The industries that are supported by industrial welding have a high job creation multiplier impact. It costs money to train a welder, and I believe it's worth it. After decades of working in industry across many sectors and gaining a deep understanding of welding training in Africa, I believe that upgrading the welding training to world-class industrial standards will have more positive, leveraged impact than any possible human capital investment that can be made at this time in history. Both directly and indirectly, the economic development it will support could literally raise hundreds of millions of people from poverty and hunger. In practical terms, it will eliminate severe poverty on the continent. More young parents will have a way to feed their kids so they don't go to bed hungry at night, and fewer moms will die from inhaling smoke from cooking fires. These are the dreams that I now embrace in my 7th decade on this planet. We are all dedicated to making Africa a better place for its youth and industry, with a parallel goal of ending poverty in 10 years. Thank you for your time today. If you are interested in joining us in this vital mission, please contact me at the email shown here. We'll gladly accept you as part of our team.